All right, we're going to get started. Welcome, everyone. We have a lot to cover, so I'm going to be pretty brief, but thank you so much, everyone, for coming to the second half of our proactive poll worker training, or I guess part two, and especially for those of you who were here last time, welcome back. We're really happy that you're here, and we're happy that you're choosing to or wanting to enrich your knowledge about being a poll worker. Sorry, forgot to introduce myself. I'm Sean Fabriga. I work in new member support for Scrutineers, and I'm going to be introducing our founder and director, Emily Levy, who's going to start this webinar. Thank you, Emily.
Hi, everyone, and welcome. Welcome back to those of you who were here last week. And if you missed last week, we will give you the link to the video so that you can watch it, because we're not going to be covering the same material. We'll do a brief review today, but we're not going to be covering the same material we covered last time. So I want to really appreciate every one of you for taking the time to be here today and for volunteering to be poll workers. It's an important job and a difficult job, and at times this year may be a frightening job, and the country is really counting on you. So thank you so much for stepping up to do this important work. So we are going to be joined today. I'm looking at 3 different screens at the same time, and that's a little bit unwieldy. So Mark, I just saw what you wrote in the chat, and that's not what we're talking about here today. So people aren't actually not going to know what that's about. So folks, ignore that comment because it's about a totally different topic and kind of confusing. This is a training that's for poll workers to learn about how to become proactive poll workers and stand up for the rights of voters and for democracy itself at the polls. I'm delighted that today we have a guest speaker who's going to be doing a presentation in the second half of our 3 half hours of this training, Brittany Baxter, who is the Training and Movement Building Coordinator for the Democracy Initiative. And she's amazing. I've really been enjoying beginning to get to know her. She's going to be doing a presentation about de-escalation should there be trouble at the polls from people who are trying to make things difficult for people to vote. So that will be coming up later, and she'll be joining us then. Back to you, Sean.
Yeah, okay, I'm going to really briefly mention what Scrutineers is, especially for those who didn't attend our first training. Really quickly. So Scrutineers is an online community of people who care about the fairness and accuracy of US elections and are committed to doing what we can to protect the elections. We're a nonpartisan organization dedicated to ending voter suppression and ensuring secure elections. And we come together in our membership site to learn, act, and connect. We just want to also specify that Scrutineers is not connected to your government, your county government. Rather, this is a supplementary training to help you be a proactive poll worker in addition to just a poll worker. And in addition, we are working with Poll Hero and other groups within Scrutineers. However, we're not part of those groups. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Let's get started.
Great, thank you, Sean, for that quick review. So let's talk about what we're going to cover today.
So first, we'll do a really speedy review of last week's training for those of you who missed it. After that, we're going to be talking about provisional ballots, learning more about them. Then what we're going to be doing is learning about types of voting systems and what to look out for with each voting system. After that, we'll talk about how to de-escalate tense and potentially violent situations at the polls. Then we'll talk about where to report problems should they arise while you're working at a polling location. Then we'll talk about your final act on election night, what that should be. And after that, we'll talk about what happens next. So what your next step will be after this training. And then finally, we will have a question and answer section to answer all of your questions.
Thank you, Sean. So if you haven't watched part 1, I'm going to review just for a moment some of what we covered to entice you into watching that video. It was, let's see, there was a link to it on the registration page for this webinar, but we can also paste that into the chat sometime during the webinar. I'm not sure if Sean can grab it right now, but we will get it to you during the webinar and also in the follow-up email. So we talked about last week why being a proactive poll worker is so important, and why we're calling you to really step into some confidence about that you are there to support making sure that everyone gets to vote and protecting election security to the extent that you're able from the position that you have. We talked about important tasks that poll workers often skip, and some of these are really, really important to protecting people's right to vote and protecting the security of the election. And so there are things that might not sound that important if you don't know what they're for, but once you understand the reason for them, and we gave some examples last week, you'll know that it's really important not to skip those steps when you're working. We talked about how you can protect voters from discriminatory behavior at the polls, and we'll be going much deeper into that with Brittany Baxter's presentation today. We talked about how to prevent and respond to common problems that occur at the polls and questions to ask at your training if you have a training session with your county. So those are just some of the things that we covered. If you did watch last week's training, I'd love for you to post into the chat now something that you learned last week that has stuck with you. One of the things that we talked about last time is making sure that along with making sure that rules are being followed, that another part of your job is to make sure that rules are not enforced any more strictly than necessary. And I wanted to give you an example of something that has happened during early voting, and this was actually in Memphis, Tennessee. There was a poll worker who sent a voter away for wearing a Black Lives Matter shirt. And the poll worker said, well, you're not allowed to express political opinions on your clothing in the polling place. That part is true. You're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to wear campaign buttons or shirts or be carrying signs for a candidate that's running for office. But as far as I know, Black Lives Matter is not running for office this year. Black Lives Matter is a movement, and it's a statement that's very important, and there's absolutely no reason that a voter cannot wear a shirt like that into the polls. And that poll worker was actually fired for taking that action. So the point I want to make is not like, oh, you're going to be fired. The point I want to make is if somebody is, that we don't want to enforce rules more strictly than we have to, especially rules that have to do with people's rights, whether it's their voting rights, their rights to freedom of speech, etc. One of the things we talked about last time is provisional ballots. And I'm wondering, okay, I was going to ask a question, but now I'm going to skip the asking questions in the chat because it seems like we don't have big chatters on the phone here. I mean, on the call here. So when we say provisional ballots are the ballots that that I'm sorry, I'm a little disorganized today. When a voter comes in to vote, they come up to the table where you are, the station where you are, and you can't tell if they're supposed to vote there or not. Maybe the information that you have doesn't match the information that they give you. Maybe they're not on the list at all. And they insist that they should be able to vote, but you don't have the ability to see that that's actually true. A provisional ballot is what you then give to the voter, and they can vote on that ballot. The ballot goes into, I'm not sure what that slide is. Let's see. The ballot is put into an envelope, and there's information for you as the poll worker to fill out on the outside of that envelope, and information for the voter to complete on the outside of the envelope. The voter then signs it. I believe the poll worker signs it as well. And that goes into a separate container for provisional ballots. When that goes back to your Board of Elections or county office, they then determine whether the ballot should be counted or not. The reason that I want to go over this carefully is that it's commonly misunderstood, even by poll workers. And it's really important because what happens, it's misunderstood in two ways. Voters are being often told that they have to vote a provisional ballot when they shouldn't be. They should be allowed to vote on a regular ballot. And another thing that happens is poll workers misunderstanding and not offering voters a provisional ballot when they should be offered one. So I want to read for you on the slide this paragraph here. That's about provisional ballots. And this is from the ncsl.org, which is the national, I forget, coalition, I think, of state legislatures. Provisional ballots ensure that voters are not excluded from the voting process due to an administrative error. They provide a fail-safe mechanism for voters who arrive at the polls on election day, or early voting, this is true too, probably, although they could just then vote on election day, and whose eligibility to vote is uncertain. They're also referred to in some states as challenge ballots or affidavit ballots, and they're required by federal law called the Help America Vote Act. When there's uncertainty about a voter's eligibility, the potential voter's name is not on the voter rolls, or a required identification document isn't available, or other issues, the election official is required to offer the provisional ballot instead of a regular ballot. So if you have received training from your county that sounds different from this, I want to encourage you to take a screenshot of this, or Melissa, would you make a note and I will include this text in the follow-up email so you'll have it and you can have it handy in case you need to show your supervisor. Thank you. So let's talk next about excuse me, let's talk next about if you are still waiting to hear whether or not you've been hired. And I know that that's the situation for some of you, and I'm very sorry to hear that that's true. I wish I had the ability to do something about it, but as Sean said, we're a community organization, a non-governmental organization, and we don't have any say in what the counties do about hiring. But I did come up with 5 ideas that I'd like to share with you about what that I would recommend that you do. And these are what I would do if I were in your situation where I didn't know yet whether I'd been hired. So the first one is check your email spam folder. Maybe they have reached out to you and you've missed the email. The second one is check your county election website for information. Even if there wasn't information the last time you checked, check again. There might be something that says, if you haven't heard from us by now, it means you haven't been hired. Or there might be something that says, we're really late getting back to people. Here's when you can expect to hear by, or who knows, our files got washed away in a flood or in the hurricane and we need you to reapply. Who the heck knows? But there may be information on your county election website. The third one is to keep calling and emailing your election office to ask. Now, I would say if you haven't heard by first thing tomorrow morning, you should be able to assume that you haven't been hired. The final day of voting, in-person voting, is at that point 24 hours away, and it's just not realistic to think that they could tell you that late in the game. The fourth idea is to use social media, or if you're on nextdoor.com, and post and ask whether other people who have applied to be poll workers are also waiting to hear. Because if you find out that they've all been told that they've all received notice and you haven't, it probably means you're not hired. And then finally, number 5 is to tell local media so they can investigate. So you could send a direct message on Twitter to a local reporter, or call your local news station or newspaper and tell them that this is a situation. They're covering every story that they can about the election, and this may well be a story that they want to cover. Okay. So we have a special guest who will be joining us today, and I want to check and see if she's here yet. we have actually two special guests. One I told you about, and one is a surprise guest who is apparently having trouble getting on the line. So let's see what I can do about that. I think what we'll do, since our already announced guest is here now, let's see, I am wondering, Brittany, if I could jump you ahead and have you present now. Is that all right with you?
Sure.
Okay, so let me go ahead and introduce you then.
Hi, folks. Give me 1 second. I am just going to pull up. If you could go ahead and
While you're doing that, I'll introduce you. How about that? While you're
works for
pulling up.
me.
And, okay, Brittany, I want to give a really warm welcome to Brittany Baxter, our guest speaker for today, who's going to be presenting about de-escalation. I'm absolutely thrilled that she agreed to do this 2 days before the election when she is incredibly busy. Brittany is the Training and Movement Building Coordinator for Democracy Initiative. As I said, Democracy Initiative is a national democracy reform coalition that has 74 national partners and a combined membership of 45 million people. This year, she's responsible for training and mobilizing 3,000 election volunteers to champion vote by mail and demand fully funded, safe, secure, and accessible election options for all. Welcome, Brittany. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you so much, Emily. I'm happy to be here with you all 2 days before what is hopefully going to be a reckoning for our democracy. So what we are going to do really quickly for the next 15 minutes is I'm just going to talk to you briefly about de-escalation tactics based on a training that was created by the League of Women Voters. I would have created a few slides just to make this a little more simple for folks, but yesterday was my son's 8th birthday, so I was just a little busy. And so we're just going to use a handout that I will send to Emily that she can share with you all later so that you can use that as a guide. So I'm going to go ahead and.
So you ready for me to share my screen now?
Yes.
Let's see. All right, there we go.
There we go. All right, folks. So what we're going to talk about first is active bystander training and de-escalation, the principles on which de-escalation strategy, tactics, and theology is based on. So de-escalation tactics and active bystander trainings are rooted in the nonviolence principles that Dr. Martin Luther King and Mahatma Gandhi used as to elevate and expand their peaceful protests. So can you scroll down a bit?
Yes.
Actually, I have it on mine. I just want that for you all to see. I'm going to be going back and forth between my two screens. So
okay, so is this the part you want showing now?
Yep. So the first thing that we're going to go through are the nonviolence principles that we abide by when we show up for bystander trainings. And this is I want everyone to keep in mind that legally I must say this. This is not for situations where there is an active shooter or there is some kind of violent threat. This is for situations where there's tension, there's potential voter suppression happening or intimidation happening. In the event that someone with a gun is threatening to or begins to shoot, we recommend that you just get yourself and as many people as you possibly can to safety as possible and contact the police. But in other instances where you see folks antagonizing, harassing, or otherwise preventing folks from actively participating in a democracy, these are the principles that we use to guide us. So we want to, the 6 basic principles that I'm just going to read them out. 1, nonviolence is a way of life for courageous people. 2, nonviolence seeks to win friendship and understanding. 3, nonviolence seeks to defeat injustice and not people. 4, nonviolence holds that suffering can educate and transform. This is something that's more applicable to the way that Dr. King's strategies during the civil rights movement, how they would engage in peaceful protest. And then 5, nonviolence chooses love instead of hate. 6, nonviolence believes that the universe is on the side of justice, right? And so we recognize that nonviolence in the face of intimidation, fear, violence, threats of violence is an incredibly difficult thing to do. And it takes a lot of strength and emotional courage to respond in a situation like that calmly. And so it's really important to keep in mind that the idea is to keep people safe and to prevent situations from escalating and potentially leading to violence. So in this training, we make several assumptions, right? So first, we assume that we have ethical, social, and political obligations to help each other when we're in a position to, right? And so in this moment, as we've seen folks, as we've been dealing with this pandemic, we've seen waves of violence plague the country with wildfires on the West Coast and economic uncertainty for most Americans, right? We are in the middle of a perfect storm where a lot of folks are at the end of their rope. And it's important that we are much more kind to each other and patient and understanding so that we can get through this moment together, right? And so that also means that we have to step up to act in solidarity when we see something happening that is not okay. So 3, the best way of responding to a bystander is through de-escalation. And it's important to keep in mind that you're there to support what the person who is being targeted wants. We don't use language like victims in this situation because we want the person who is being targeted and harassed to still be the person making the decisions about how the situation plays out. And so it's important that if you are intervening, you are checking in with that person, making eye contact, asking them if it's okay to intervene, asking them what they need, what they want, and being there to support them in that moment, because that is more important than giving any attention or feeding into the other person who is antagonizing, because the reason for the antagonization is to create a situation where there's a tension being drawn and they are having an impact on the people around them. And so the best thing to do is to not feed that and to focus that energy towards the person who is being harmed. Okay. And so it's also important, like as poll workers, hopefully this will be less of an issue for you than it will be for folks waiting in line. But you also should think about practicing how to respond so that it gets through your hesitations and your instincts, because instinctively, when you see someone doing something, harassing someone, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to yell at that person, right? You're going to respond to them as aggressively as they are responding to the target. And that is actually not an effective way to de-escalate the situation. And so it's important to keep all of those things in mind so that we ensure that people have as positive an experience as possible at the polls. So if you would like to scroll down, we're going to talk about how to be ready to be a bystander who intervenes. Okay. So when you think about who you are as a bystander, I tell folks that you should think about you're a superhero, right? Because you have to be brave in the face of potential danger, and you have to step in front of someone else and sometimes put yourself physically in front of someone else who's being harmed. And that's really scary, and it can be really scary, especially, with the current state of tension that we have in this country, right? And it's all coming to a head tomorrow, day after tomorrow. And so it's important to remember in your mind, you kind of have to hype yourself up, psych yourself up, and get yourself in a headspace so that you can confidently stand up for someone else. So when you think about stepping in as a bystander, there are a few key things you need to keep in mind, right? You need to be aware of what's happening around you when you're in public, so that as watching, the person who might be harassing folks might not be by themselves. They may have other folks with them, and it's important to just watch what's happening around you, right? You want to focus your attention on the person who is being targeted, but you also want to watch what's happening around you to make sure that there isn't any developments in the situation that could potentially escalate the situation worse unexpectedly. And if you start to see something developing, you start to see a conversation bubbling into anger, someone's yelling, start to focus, like prepare yourself. If you have headphones in, take them out. Get your phone ready in case you need to record something, and just prepare yourself. Make sure that the people are aware that you are now paying attention, and that whatever is happening is being witnessed by others. So we also want to recognize that we all have a tendency to make the assumption that we don't need to say something because someone surely will step up, and that's simply not the case, right? Folks as a tenant have a tendency to not step up and get engaged because they expect someone else to do it. And so you are going to have to be that person that elects themselves to be the one that steps up and says, this is not okay. We are not doing this. How can I help? How can I support you in that situation? Okay. So it's super important to, as you think about all of these things, also bring other folks into the situation. The more people who are paying attention, the more people who recognize that this is going on, the more social pressure is created and put on the person who is harassing the target, right? And so people are more likely to step back, to de-escalate, to walk away if they notice that their behavior is disproved of by the folks around them. Okay. And again, I want to reiterate again, when you begin to engage and initiate engagement with someone, please get their consent. They might want to handle this their own way, and they may have a strategy or a way that they want to react. And sometimes in a moment of heightened emotions, they might not understand that you are coming to help. So it's important to make eye contact. And because we're going to be wearing masks, to make sure that your eyes are smiling, that it's very clear that you are there to help and to support them, and you are not there to add to the problem. And so making sure that you're asking them if they're okay, you're asking if they need some help, just give it to them. Don't come in and take over the situation. You want to make sure that the person still feels empowered. So keep all of that in mind. So next, we're going to talk about how to deal with attackers' anger in the line or in real life, just anywhere else. Because what folks don't realize is that voter intimidation and harassment is illegal anywhere, not just at polling locations. So if someone comes up to you in the grocery store and threatens you because they see that you have a certain button saying that you're supporting a certain candidate, and they threaten you based on your vote or who you're supporting, that is voter intimidation. It is illegal. Whenever it happens and wherever it happens, it is not okay. It is a felony. It is a federal offense, and that is important to know. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about how to deal with the attacker's anger. Right. So there are a few things that you can use, a few tips that you can do to deal and manage the attacker while you're being supportive to the targeted person. You don't make eye contact with them. You look beyond them, and you make sure that you're not even not giving them any energy. It's almost like, for those of us who are parents, right? When your child is throwing a tantrum, you don't respond and feed their energy. You ignore them until they decide to calm down and have a conversation like a big boy or girl, right? And so it's important to not feed that energy, because that person wants to draw you in. They want to engage you. They want to draw you into their anger and have you feed off of that. You don't engage with their words. You don't need to respond to them. Folks will say really hateful, disgusting, and disturbing things in order to get a reaction, and you cannot give them what they want. And so instead of engaging with them, you want to keep in mind what they're saying, if there are threats being made, if it's starting to escalate. That's important to note in case you need to prepare to call the authorities or to call for help, right? Or to remove the target from the situation. But focus on speaking, counteracting what that person is saying with positive messages for the person who's being targeted, so that they know they're not alone in the situation. And again, I say this as someone who has failed often to do this. Do not engage in the drama. Resist. Just remind yourself, stay focused, that you are here to support someone who is being harassed, and do not get drawn. Don't play into the attacker's hand, because ideally what they want is to make a big scene, and they want to discourage folks from voting. They want to harass people and intimidate them. And if you give them no energy, they will either walk away, step back, or eventually just figure out, turn their energy somewhere else. Right. Okay. How do folks feel about this? Is this helpful? Okay. So we want to also just keep in mind that if you don't feel safe, you do not need to stay. Remove yourself from the situation and call someone who has the authority to handle the situation itself, right? We are supporting each other, but if you do not have a firearm, or you do not have the defense training, or the authority to handle a situation like that, please do not put yourself in harm's way. It's important to stand and support folks, but if the situation escalates to a point where you feel that you or the other person is in danger, remove yourselves from that situation. and then go find someone who can handle that situation. Okay. All right. So let's scroll down a bit and let's talk a little bit about, scroll down a little bit more. I want to talk a little bit about the principles of bystander intervention. So these are the ways that you show up as a bystander and make sure you do it in an authentically genuine and effective way, right? So we want to show moral courage by acting from a calm place despite of the fear or the anxiety around the situation. And you want to focus on leaning on those nonviolent principles instead of emotion, anxiety, frustration, self-righteousness. You want to focus on the goal. The goal is to de-escalate the situation and to keep everyone safe and to diffuse any tension, right? And so when we engage in de-escalation, we do it to limit the ability of a situation to become more intense and to reduce the drama so that everyone who is around in the area can move on, right? So we also want to shift the attention in the situation, right? Like when you shift the attention, you shift the power dynamics. So the person who is fueling this with all of their anger and hatred, you are taking power away from them by not feeding into it. And so it's important that like you interact as much as possible with the person who's being targeted so that they feel seen as a human being. Because the idea of this is to also demean and dehumanize the targets that folks are going to be seeking out. We're going to see this kind of harassment with Black and brown folks. We're going to see this kind of harassment with people who are deemed potentially not American. We're going to see this kind of harassment in areas that are progressive, that are pro one candidate over another. We are going to see this happening with communities that are already vulnerable and already have been targeted by violence and hate. And so it's important that you do everything you can to restore that person's humanity in the moment, right? And so again, like I said, we want to treat this attacker like a child, right? If you're having a tantrum, you are going to sit over there and whine until you tire yourself out. And we, the adults, are going to be over here and we're going to focus on a solution to this problem, make sure that everyone feels safe, right? And you want to make sure that you bring other people in for additional support and responses. Folks are going to be in line for several hours, right? The tensions are going to be high, people are going to be frustrated. And a lot of times it takes one person to stand up and speak up so that other folks, it's a domino effect, other folks will speak up because no one wants to hear someone complaining, screaming, yelling epithets and slurs and harassing folks while they're waiting in line. You know, it's already a tense and stressful situation for folks already. And that is not what participating in our democracy is supposed to be like. And so finally, we want to recognize that we want to reach out to the targeted person so that we can be present as an ally and an equal, right? And we don't want to take away their power and their decisions and how they want to respond to the situation, right? We want to make sure we get their consent to ask, make sure they actually want our help, make sure we get consent if we touch them, if we want to just support them with physical touch, stand close to them. You know, that's especially important now that we have, we're coming into the second wave of COVID and folks are already going to be on high alert and really, and already tense. And so it's important to make sure that it's okay before you step in to someone's space that you get their consent, right? Asking them what they need from you. How can you support them? Because the way that you think you might be able to support them may not be what it is they actually need, right? And then offering possible solutions. And they might not like those solutions and it's okay, but the fact that you are there and engaging with them is all that matters, right? And to just support them emotionally and give them empathy, right? So I want you to keep in mind all of these principles and then feel free to share these with folks who are going to be waiting in line, if you have family members who are not working as poll workers, friends, but who anticipate potentially encountering these kinds of situations. This is really going to be helpful for folks who are going to be waiting in line as well. So if you go down, if you would like to scroll down a little bit more. Oh, I think that's it. All right, so I want to really quickly for folks, talk a little bit about social media and the way that it can be used to de-escalate, right? So mostly you will probably not need to document any situation, but there are scenarios where you see something potentially bubbling into a potentially super dangerous situation, you want to have a plan. So if someone has to step in, that person who is stepping in and trying to de-escalate the situation should not be the same person who is recording the situation. You want to make sure that if you feel the need to record something, you put your phone on do not disturb, especially if you're going to live stream it and post it on social media, because if you get a call or a text message, it will disrupt the feed, and that feed could potentially be used later in case there is a situation that the authorities need to step into. And we want to make sure that folks have all the documentation they need in order to protect themselves and get justice, right? Also want to make sure that when we are posting, we're posting specifically like what the polling location is, where we are, what time of the day it is, what is happening. You want to provide some context in the beginning of once you start to film, so folks have an understanding of what happened before you said what led you to feel the need to film. But you don't want to take away from the situation. You want to make sure that it's very clear what's playing out, and just make sure that, again, we are centering the targeted person in all of this, because this is going to be this has been a really difficult year for all of us, and the folks who are going to be sought out and targeted have really had the worst part of it, right? And so this for people who are doing this because it depends, their lives depend on it, their livelihoods, their children's futures, their safety, their health depends on it. Those people are already going to be in a really broken and vulnerable place, and it's important that we come and we step up and we protect each other, because that is why we are going to the polls in such high and record-breaking numbers, is because we have a say about what our country looks like and what our democracy looks like, and it is important that everyone has a right to participate in this democracy fully. So that's all I got for you. If folks have questions, I'm happy to stick around for a minute.
Great. Thank you so much, Brittany. That's amazing. Really, really helpful. And I hope everyone was paying close attention. Again, Brittany Baxter from the Democracy Initiative. And we have a Q&A box on the screen. So I see one question, which is about getting the handout, and yes, we can send out that handout to you. I expect the email to you will be going out tomorrow morning. There's one thing that's not ready yet, that we have a wallpaper for you for your phones that will have the hotline numbers and things like that on it, and a couple of little tips from Brittany. And the designer who's designing it isn't quite finished yet. So, but by tomorrow morning, I believe that email will be able to go out to you, and it will have this information in it. So
please send those our way as well, because I'll distribute that to the coalition. It'd be awesome.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That would be great. Other questions for Brittany? You're welcome to either use the Q&A box or the chat. How would you handle someone not wearing a mask and refusing to wear a mask in line around people who object to the unmasked person talking loudly or even coughing or being provocative? Great question.
So in that situation, I would respond and say, you have to wear a mask in order to be in this line. This is a health risk. If you do not want to comply, we can call them. That's when you defer to an officer or to someone else, because at that point, that person is intentionally coming to create an issue. Because with all the videos that we've seen this year, with folks going into stores, filming themselves, berating people and coughing and just being ridiculous, that's very intentional, and it's designed and structured to create a situation where people react emotionally and very viscerally to that, because that is a very dangerous thing to do. I think that
we're getting comments that there are some places where a mask cannot be mandated inside to vote.
Oh, oof.
Yeah.
I am sorry to hear that. I am so sorry to hear that. I'm from New York. Governor Cuomo is not playing, so I flew.
This is even California, people are saying.
That's interesting. So okay, so that, I mean, I think so. So that's a really good question. I think that is a question that you should actually refer to when you do your poll worker training. You should reach out to the county and ask how they're advising folks. Is there going to be because I know that some counties are setting up a separate place for people who refuse to wear their masks, and that those people can be directed accordingly. If you don't want to wear a mask, that's fine, but this is where you need to go to handle that. And if you're going to continue to disrupt other people, that's something we can't have, right? Like at the end of the day, you can't disturb the peace. So in a public place. So I think that Curbside voting. Okay, so that's perfect. If they don't want to wear a mask, offer them curbside voting. If they continue to escalate, then it's okay. We can't continue to do this because many people are waiting in line. We are trying to keep this as easy and simple as a process as possible. And then you just let them know that like they can't continue to disturb the peace. If you're going to continue to make a scene when we are offering you solutions, I'm happy to call the police and you can have this conversation with them.
So
right?
would you talk a little bit about when you would recommend calling the police and when people might be tempted to call the police that you would not recommend it?
So calling the police is really complicated simply because most of the folks who are going to be targeted come from communities where their relationship to the police is hostile. It's not a positive one. And so I think that and when it comes to someone making threats of violence to the point where you're concerned that they're actually going to move on it, or they have a weapon and they're acting aggressively and they're threatening to use it, that's when you would call the police, right? I think that in situations where people are being aggressive and they're starting to get physical, right? So if people are in physical danger, then you contact the police. Other than that, it's just ignoring them. You treat them like a toddler who's throwing a tantrum, and then you focus your energy on the person who's being targeted and harassed.
Thank you. So we've got 2 more questions, and then I'm going to need to cut the questions off until the end. I don't know if you're able to stay till the end in case there are more questions for you.
I'm going to turn my video off, and then I'll be around doing some things around the house.
Okay.
I gotta get down to Georgia.
I understand. It's a crazy busy time, and happy birthday to your son. I got to meet him on a video call. It was fun. So, okay, 2 more questions for you. What should I do as a small 17-year-old girl in an escalating situation where the antagonizer may not take me seriously?
I think that's a great question. And I'm going to refer back to what we said earlier. You do not give the antagonizer any attention. You put them in a corner. In your mind, you put them in a corner and let them yell into the void. You should focus your energy on supporting the person who's being targeted. You keep them calm. You make sure that they know that they're not alone in the situation. And then if it gets to be overwhelming for both of you, you remove yourselves from the situation. And then you may need to call someone else, right? So it may be another poll worker. It may be if you have security at that location, have security come. And if the person starts to, again, threaten physical harm or starts to violate your personal space, then you may consider calling the authorities.
Okay, and Sterling has a comment. I would say you can't be in here without a mask. If you want people to hear your voice, you need to buy a mask because some people don't want to get sick. And I don't know if you agree, Brittany, but what I would say to that is in this time, you should be getting specific counsel from the county that hires you as a poll worker about what you should do in this situation, because it's absolutely a situation that we can't anticipate happening. So you need to find out what's required where you live, so you don't end up getting arrested for telling somebody they're not allowed to wear a mask when
Absolutely.
You don't have a legal right to do that.
You are spot on. The problem is that with our voting infrastructure is that it varies so differently from municipality to municipality. You need to build a relationship for next time. Build a relationship with the county officials who understand the rules and have a contingency plan. And because most counties have developed something, because this has obviously been our reality for most of the year. And so they've had to come up with plans for how to deal with folks who are going to objectively refuse to wear masks. They've had to come up with solutions for folks who are differently able, disabled, and vulnerable. And so they have a plan in place. You just need to get something in writing, because folks may need to. People will love to demand to see something in writing or to see the bylaws or whatever ridiculous requests they're going to make. I think it's important to have a copy or two just so that other poll workers can also refer in case this is an issue that comes up and you can't call back up. And that way it's clear, and then can take a look at it themselves.
Thank you. Thank you again so much for being here. And if you can pop back in a half hour or so, in case there are more questions, that would be great. And I think you'll be able to see whether there are or not. I know it's 2 days before the election, incredibly busy time. And I so appreciate your taking the time to be here today. Thank you, Brittany.
Happy to be here. Thank you, folks. Enjoy the rest of the training.
So we are going to be now talking about the different types of voting machines that may be in use where you vote. And what I'm going to do actually is I'm going to share with you a way that you can look up what type of voting machine is in use where you are going to be working. So it's by county. It will tell you what kind of voting machines are in use. And we're going to go over, so this is something you can look at later, but we're going to go over what those basic types are, not every different model, but 4 basic types of voting machines, and what's important for you, just kind of top layer of what's important for you as a poll worker to know in terms of security of the election and issues that may come up. So the link that I'm going to give you, and we will put this in the follow-up email as well, is to verifiedvoting.com. They have a tool called, I'm sorry, .org. They have a tool called the verifier where you can hone in on a map, drill down to the county level, and then it will tell you, it will actually give you a color code for what kind of machine is being used, and then it will tell you the actual model and stuff. But I'm going to be using the color codes that are on that map to refer to the different types of machines. So if you're taking notes, what I would recommend is that you know, when I'll tell you, oh, these are the machines that will be coded green on the map, and you can write down green and then write down the information about that kind of machine, and then you'll be able to refer to that when you look it up for your county later. So I hope that that made sense. Trying to balance that there's a lot of information to share with you. I don't want to overwhelm you, and I want to make sure we get everything fit in. So let's go back to the slides and to the voting machine section. Okay, great, thank you. So the first kind of voting machine is called an optical scanner, and this will be green on the map at verified voting. It scans paper ballots. So you can see in this picture a paper ballot going into the machine, and it's scanned and counted inside that machine. And these machines are somewhat outdated, but they're still in use. And I put the name of the actual machine that is pictured here. And then the next one is a digital scanner, which is also coded green on the map. So there's a couple different shades of each of the colors. Right now, for our purposes, just pay attention to whether it's green, I think it's green, yellow, orange, or red, okay? And don't worry about which shade it is. So a different shade of green on the map is digital scanners. These also scan paper ballots. So you'll see in this one where it says DS200, a hand feeding a paper ballot into the machine. Voting on paper ballots that are marked by hand by the voter is the most secure way to vote, because we have that voter record that the voter actually marked themselves. So we have a way to check if that really is how people voted. Unfortunately, those checks don't happen as often as they should, but it's at least possible to do that. So these two types of machines, the optical scanner and the digital scanner, again, they're both going to be green on the map, are kind of the best we have right now, particularly these digital scanners, which, unlike the optical scanners, produce a record called a digital ballot image, which is actually like a photograph of every ballot that is fed into it. And those are really important to us as election protection folks, because we can actually sometimes get copies of those and count the votes ourselves to check to see if the machine had the right vote count. And that's something we're going to be doing. We may be doing in some places if it's necessary in Scrutineers. And if you want to volunteer to help count votes in that kind of situation, it's a fascinating thing to do. And contacting Scrutineers to volunteer is a great way to get involved in that. So there are 2 basic types of these digital scanners. The one on the left, the lower photo in this slide, is a scanner that would be at a polling place, at a precinct. And the one on the right is a central count scanner that's much, much faster. You can see the curving path that the ballots take through the machine. And these are more likely to be used not at a polling place, but at the central office, likely for counting vote by mail or other huge volumes of votes. So for you as a poll worker, what are some important things when it comes to these two types of machines? One thing is, because it's the most secure way of voting, if you are working in a place where there is actually a choice of how voters can vote between the next systems I'm going to show you, where voters are actually marking their choices on a computer versus paper ballots, that you want to make sure to tell everyone that they have that option. And if you can encourage them to vote on paper ballots, I would really recommend it. So I have in California, there are a lot of places that have had, for the last number of years, have had both kinds of systems. And sometimes when I go to vote, the poll worker will sort of assume that everyone wants to vote on the computer, and sometimes they will assume that everyone wants to vote a paper ballot, and sometimes they'll offer me the option. So if you can behave in a way that is assuming people want to vote on paper, that makes for a more secure election. Let's go to the next slide. So the next one is a ballot marking device. This has a screen that's in the little diagonal box on the top, where the voter marks their selections, and then their selections are printed out onto a piece of paper that shoots out of the machine or comes out of the machine. The voter is then supposed to check to make sure that what's on the paper is actually how they wanted to vote, and then feed the vote either back into the same machine or in some cases into a different machine to be counted. Now, there are security problems with these machines that my colleagues and I have been working actually to have states and counties not choose to use these machines as a general category. And I don't have the time to get into the specifics of it. Some of you, if any of you are in Los Angeles, you may know that Los Angeles just built its own voting system called the Voting System for All People, which is a ballot marking device and is better than some of the others in some ways, but also has some problems. So one of the issues is that these machines will not only, when they print out the list of your selections, they don't show you all the choices that were on the ballot. They just show you the options that you selected. And sometimes it's hard to know whether that really is what you meant or not. And they also have on them either a barcode or a QR code into which your votes are coded. And that is actually what's counted. And it is actually possible for a computer to print out words that say you voted for candidate A and no on proposition 3 and whatever the other things are, but code different information into the barcode and count it that way. And that's because humans can't read barcodes or QR codes with our eyes. Many of us who are working for greater transparency in elections are not happy with these machines. Now, from a poll worker standpoint, what's important for you to know is that it is part of the design of these machines that voters are supposed to check the paper that comes out to make sure that it has their votes listed on it accurately before feeding it back into the machine. But poll workers rarely tell voters to do that, and voters rarely do it. So something you can do as a proactive poll worker to make the election safer is to tell every single voter, even after you get tired of saying it, to be sure to check carefully to make sure that the selections that are printed out from the machine are correct. And if they have a sample ballot with them, you could even suggest that they compare it to their sample ballot if they've filled out the sample ballot with their selections. Okay, so that's a ballot marking device. And the next slide is a different kind of machine where people vote on a computer. These are called direct record electronic, or DRE machines. Like a ballot marking device, people actually touch the screen, so they're sometimes referred to as touchscreen voting machines. Sometimes they have what's called a paper trail. So you can see it's a little bit small, but you can see you may be able to see on this left hand, there's two different models in this picture. So on the left hand one, there's this little thing that looks like a receipt right here that shows what the voters' votes are. Again, it's possible for the computer to show one thing on the screen and the paper, but count something else. So we talked some about this sort of issue last time. This is the kind of machine, either with or without a paper trail, where there have been reports of what gets called vote flipping, where someone will touch the screen for one candidate and another, and it will show up as they're having selected a different candidate, and they'll go back over it again and try to correct it, and sometimes it won't correct. This scares voters a lot, with good reason. And often what happens is a voter will tell the poll worker, and the poll worker will think it's the voter's problem. If voters tell you they are seeing vote flipping, take it seriously. These machines should be taken offline immediately and not used for the remainder of the election, even if it means that emergency paper ballots have to be given to voters. It does not actually necessarily mean that the election has been rigged, which people tend to think it means if they see that. It can also be a problem with the calibration of the machine, especially because these systems are really old and outdated. They run on software that's no longer supported. They are getting less and less accurate as time goes by. They're being phased out, but they are still in use in a number of places around the country. So if voters are having problems with the machine, we want the machine taken offline because it may not be counting their votes accurately. And then one more slide, which is of an example of what's called an auto mark, which is an election system that is set up, that is created to provide access to voters with disabilities. So it's got a bunch of different features that make it easier to use, or that make it possible for voters who are blind or visually impaired or have some other disabilities to use it. And every place that people vote, other than at home, has to have an accessible system for voters with disabilities. And we talked last week about it sometimes being a problem that those systems don't get set up because the lead poll worker will think no one's going to need to use them. And then that decreases the disability access, the accessibility for voters with disabilities who come to vote. So it's one thing that you can do to protect voting rights, to make sure that those systems are set up before the doors open. Let me just check if let's see. Okay, so that is, I'm done with that slide, and you could turn the slides off. And the next thing that I want to do is introduce our special guest. I told you that we had a surprise guest, and you may see her lurking in the background and know who it is. Last week, I showed you a little video by an actress named Mimi Kennedy, who is one of the stars of the CBS sitcom Mom. And she's also a longtime poll worker in Los Angeles County and a veteran of the struggle for increased voting rights and election security. And Mimi Kennedy is here with us today and is going to talk to you for just a few minutes about her experience as a poll worker. Mimi, I'm going to unmute you, or ask you to unmute your line, and then you're on.
I did it.
Thank you so much for coming. Welcome.
Oh, thank you, Emily. I was looking forward to seeing the verifier map on a screen.
We may have time to show it. If people have questions about it in the Q&A, we may have time to show it.
Wonderful tool, and I use it probably daily. Anyway, I'm so excited. Is everybody on here going to be a poll worker or a poll observer, or just learning about what the importance of it is? I don't need to know.
We set this call up to be for poll workers, and one thing that I know is that we have folks on the call who applied to be poll workers and still haven't heard back about whether they were hired or not, which is very stressful.
About poll workers, you may hear like at noon, suddenly your phone will ring.
Is that really true? Like tomorrow they might still hear?
Election day tends to have, at least in LA County, which is 4 million voters, and it's the largest voting jurisdiction in the nation. So it's managed, it is hard to manage. And they do call up anybody who has been a poll worker before to be like a substitute teacher, sometimes during the day.
During the day on election day, not just the day before.
They have done it. If you've been a poll worker before, they know you can walk into the situation and not need the training. If you've taken the training, you're on a list and they will call you if they need you for some reason or other. But anyway.
So I had said to people, if they hadn't heard by first thing tomorrow morning, they should assume they haven't been hired. Do you disagree with that?
I don't disagree with it. But if you've taken the training, and I wonder if you have a handbook. At our training, they give you a handbook and you go home with it. And you are now perfectly forearmed to do what you need to do as an authority.
There are actually states that don't have training.
Yeah, well, that then you probably won't be called because they're inviting criticism. Because if they're going to invite untrained people into the polls that have never done it before, if your only training in your county is doing it and you have never done it before but signed up to be a poll worker, you probably won't be called because then they'd be liable to a lot of criticism in case things went wrong.
It's only the most important election of our lifetimes. Why would we want poll workers to be trained?
But it's great. Use the verifier because, Emily, what you just gave us a little tutorial, plus knowing which of those machines are the ones that you have to vote on. Perhaps you know from having gone to vote. Perhaps your jurisdiction has changed its voting system. A lot of them changed this election or the primary. So anyway, I think it's good to train yourself as best you can. And Emily gave you some good hints, as if you were going to be a poll worker, because even if you were to observe at the polls, you need to know the system. You need to know the rules of the system. I think what I want to say, including following up on the nonviolence training that was fantastic that we just got, is election day is a day when the citizenry takes a test that they're not prepared for, that even if they took the same test 2 years ago, they forget exactly how to do it. So psychologically, you have people going in to do a very important thing, and they have different psychological approaches. One is they want to do it right, and they're ashamed to show that they don't know how to do it right. Two,
really
they want to do it right and they're pretty sure they can do it right, and they're so sure they can do it right that they don't want to hear any guff from anybody else that they're doing it wrong, even if they are doing it wrong. And three, they want to do it. It's their voice, their vote, all that emphasis that we have placed on the individual empowerment of the ballot. But people have attitudes about authority figures who are telling them what to do because they have had the training or they know the rules. And so the approach, if you are a poll worker, and remember, you're an authority figure that doesn't sort of have any authority on the day of individual empowerment. So it's a very dicey situation. And I have found that the most effective way to help prevent someone from losing their vote when they don't want to hear that what they're doing is going to make them lose their vote, they'd rather be wrong and lose their vote than be shamed and do it another way, is to explain how their vote is going to get counted. You know, what's happening in various places. They don't know what to do with the BMD is especially difficult because they think they voted on a touch screen. They've seen it on TV and they think that's what happened, and they don't know what to do with the paper. Is it a receipt? Do they take it away with them to prove they voted? This is a copy of what just happened in the machine. So in that case, the poll workers who are able to quickly explain, and then it will come out, and make sure you check it because that's your ballot. That's your voice. You haven't voted inside that machine. All that machine did was give you your voice. That's your voice, and you have to hit the button so it goes back in the machine so it'll be counted, or bring it over here in the case of the ES&S, bring it over here and make sure it goes through this scanner, because that's the way the vote is counted. You are not voting on that machine. That paper ballot is your voice and your vote, and now you have to do something to make sure it gets counted. When you explain in that way, what is your voice and your vote, people are thrilled to tell you they don't know. They go, I never knew that. That's amazing. Oh, really? I thought this was a receipt. I thought this counted. So any approach, learn your voting system on that verifier map, and what you learn about how the vote is cast and then counted, the most helpful thing you can do, and to diffuse any authority back and forth, is to simply explain, this was the casting, and here's how the counting is going to work. You know, it has been counted, it hasn't been counted, whatever happens in your jurisdiction. So there's that. And it even helps if you're just observing at the polls. Sometimes you can say in the line to people, you know, do you have any questions? But they're worried if you're not an official, and they should be worried. Anybody, oh, can I help you vote? You know, you want to not seem like that person. I had a friend who said she brought her mail ballot in to be dropped off at the polls at early voting, and there was a long line, and there were, you know, people in masks, and there was someone with an official thing standing at the door going, is that your mail ballot? That's fine, give it to me. I'm putting the mail ballots in the box, which is in there if you don't want to come in. And she did it. And then she called me and said, was I just stupid? Did I just give my vote away after everything I've learned? And I said, no, you probably have not, but it's good to have second thoughts about that. To say, if somebody were to be doing that at the door somewhere and you saw it, you might want to watch for a minute and then ask to see the credentials and go, oh, this is wonderful. Is the county helping the place not be crowded? Is, you know, maybe notice, do they go in and drop these at the ballot box? If they do, then you could be a reassurance to people going, I've seen that person, I've seen her do it. She's working with the county, helping prevent crowding at this place. You know, but that's the kind of thing to be aware of. In other words, see it from a slightly paranoid point of view, check and recheck, know how the votes are being cast, and know how they're counted on that system. And then from that perspective, deal with people that way.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
that's tremendously helpful, and I'm so glad that you took the time to be here today. And I know you've been doing this for a long time, and you speak about it very movingly about what it means to you to be a poll worker. And I just wonder if you want to give a few short words of encouragement to people who are doing this for the first time.
Oh, it's the best possible thing that you can do. Everything I've learned, I mean, I'm now 20 years on, they say, oh, talk to Mimi. She's great. She's one of the experts. Well, expert. I learned from experience. And I did it because I once went to fight the Diebold machines from coming into California. And I was in Sacramento, and there was this august 3 authority men at the poll. And one of them, who was very defensive because he was with the vendor, looked at me and went, have you ever been a poll worker? And I had to say no. And I was steeped in shame and self-recrimination because it was such a horrible answer to have to give at that moment. So I swore I would never have to give that answer again. I went and was a poll worker, and now I kind of know what he was talking about. A lot of the vendors were like, we can make it easier. We can make it easier on the poll worker. It's all going to happen inside the computer. It'll be a wonderful voting experience. But they either forgot, never knew, or they were all wolves and they wanted to eat up democracy. They forgot all the transparency needs for democracy. But now I have an appreciation of the problems and challenges that vendors and election officials are trying to solve or to meet. And that has been invaluable also in terms of dealing with election officials.
Thank you so much. Are you able to stay and I have a little bit more
Yeah,
10th, and then we'll do a Q&A at the end.
you know, I can stay till 5:20. I should let me check back in. I have to call somebody I gave an appointment to, but I can be back in before. When do you stop?
I probably need 5 minutes or so, and we're
Okay.
supposed to stop at 5:30, though we may stay a little longer depending on how many
I'll
questions.
jump back in if you can. Otherwise, send me the questions and I'll answer them on the Scrutineers website.
Okay, actually, not everyone here is a member of Scrutineers, so, but this is a reason for them to join. So, but thank you for that offer, and if you can jump back in, do. And thanks so much for being here and for all that you do for democracy.
I hope I meet everybody on this call doing the work. There's lots more to be done, but you're starting with being a poll worker. This year, you're going to be becoming invaluable to the movement. Thank you.
Thank you, Mimi.
Okay.
Mimi Kennedy, everyone. Okay, we have just a little bit more to cover. Thank you for hanging in for this amount of time. I am not, Sean, could you try to figure out why I'm seeing Brittany's thumbnail on her screen rather than seeing me? Is everybody else seeing Brittany or seeing me? I like seeing Brittany better than seeing me, but when I'm talking for people will probably want to see me.
I'm seeing Brittany too.
Okay, I'm not sure why that is.
I see everyone who's on the call.
Okay, not sure what's going on there. So I'm just gonna continue. We've got a couple more slides to go, and then we will open it up for questions and answers. And oh, I did realize that I forgot to say after saying that the paper ballot machines were green, I forgot to say the color codes for the other ones. So the ballot marking devices are yellow or orange. Those are the ones where you vote on the screen, but they print out a piece of paper that has your selections on it. And then the direct record electronic, those old machines, are red. Okay, so next we're going to talk about, and we went over this last time, but it's so important that I'm just going to go over it quickly again now. When you do observe problems like the ones we talked about last week or the ones that we're talking about tonight, what do you do? So we need the slides again, Melissa. There are a couple of different places that you can, that's not the right slide. Oh, yes, it is. I'm sorry, I forgot that was there. Thank you. Okay, so we want you to be standing up for the rules to be followed in the polling place. Those rules are there for a reason, and often that reason is to protect either the voters or the vote. If you find that something is amiss, a machine is not working, voters are being turned away for reasons they shouldn't be, the kinds of problems we've been talking about in these two training sessions, we want you to report it if possible to both of these organizations that are on the call. The first one is csay2020.com, and we had a demonstration of that last time. It's the one that has a map that has dots on it showing where there have been problems recorded. And this is reporting it here will get your incident onto the map. And then reporters can come and attorneys can be notified to help deal with the situation, help the people that need to find out about it. And then the other one is 866 Our Vote, which is the election protection hotline run by the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights. It's been around, I believe, since 2004. I volunteered for it that year, and I'm pretty sure that was the first year it existed. And what they have the ability to send an attorney out in person if that's necessary. They have thousands of attorneys around the country, or they can put you in touch with one, and you can either call them or text them. And that's really important, because if there's something going on in the polling place, you may not have the ability at that moment to say, I'm going to go to the restroom and then make a phone call. It may be that you need to do something quietly, and you could text them and they will respond. Well, theoretically they will respond quickly. On election day, who knows how many situations there will be, but they will do their best to respond quickly. They have tons of volunteers all around the country. If you do take video of whatever happened, you can actually upload your video to that first one, the csay2020.com site. And if your video, they only can take really short videos, but if your video is longer than that, you could upload it to YouTube and, excuse me, upload it to YouTube and then get the link and put the link in CSAY 2020. So either way, you'll be able to share your documentation, which may become evidence in a lawsuit or an election challenge, or even in criminal proceedings, depending on what happens. So let's see the next slide. So I want to talk for a moment about, we've been really covering, because hopefully all of you are poll workers or trying to be poll workers, what you'll be doing during your shift. And when that shift is over, after the polls close, what happens is that you'll have a checklist of things to do to finish up everything, to make sure that all of the equipment and the election materials are accounted for, that all of the ballots, if they're paper ballots, are bundled up and transported securely back to the elections office, procedures like that. And then it will suddenly be over. You've had this intense day that's both hard and sometimes boring. It's grueling, it's inspiring, it's all different kinds of ways. As we've discussed, it might be scary this year. And then whoever is the lead poll worker will probably leave with the election materials with someone else in the car and take them back to the elections office, and it'll be like, okay, you're done. And some poll workers that I have talked to have actually said it's kind of a letdown moment. It's like anticlimactic. So we have actually something that you can do before you leave that will just sort of be the icing on the cake of the evening, and is also really important to do. And this is something you don't have to be a poll worker to do. You can show up outside the polling place after it closes, even if you didn't get hired, and help protect the elections by doing what this 2-minute video is going to show you. So can we go ahead and play the video, Melissa?
Did you know you can help keep our elections fair and accurate using just your phone? After polling closes, precincts post total vote counts at each polling location. These are called poll tapes. This is where you come in. You can take a photo or video of the poll tape and submit it to one of the many independent organizations that are collecting and analyzing them. With your help, these groups can catch differences between the vote counts posted at polling places and the official vote counts being reported. If differences are spotted, that indicates a problem and deserves further investigation. How can you get started? Look for more information about using poll tapes to protect election results on the Scrutineers YouTube channel. And to get involved in other projects to make sure our votes are counted accurately, join us at scrutineers.org. Sign up to volunteer by visiting validatethevoteusa.org. But first things first, make sure you vote. Voting is the most important thing you can do to make sure your voice is heard.
So that is one of the election protection activities that people can do whether or not they are they're hired as poll workers. And there are many more things you can do, one other on election night and others in the weeks that follow during the time that the election is, that the votes are being counted and any challenges are being worked out. And we at Scrutineers have a brand new tool that actually just went live in the hour before this call, and I haven't even gotten to see the final version of it yet, which is making me a little nervous. It's a new tool to help people figure out which of the many opportunities to help protect the election might be a good fit for them. And I'll just give you a glimpse of what it looks like, but we're going to send you the link to it in the follow-up email. So let me just share my screen for a moment and show you what it looks like. So it looks like this. If you if you look at it on your phone, you'll just see this yellow part. You enter your email address, and then it's going to ask you, it'll send you a PIN that you need to put in, and then it will ask you a bunch of questions about when you're available, how much time you're available, what skills you have, things like that. And then it will give you suggestions of several projects that you can check out and see which of them you might want to be part of. For some of them, you'll need to join Scrutineers, our organization. We have a whopping one-time $1.99 membership fee, which we charge to keep bots and trolls out of the site. And then once you're in, you have access to all of our trainings, including for the trainings for each of the projects that we're doing to help protect the election. And it's also, it's kind of like a social media site inside. You can make posts and ask questions and people can respond to you. There's a special part, kind of like a Facebook group, but we call them circles inside our site. There's one that's specifically for poll workers. So if you want to have that open on your phone, we do have a phone app. If you join tonight or tomorrow, you could ask questions there during the day on Tuesday as you're working as a poll worker, if you have something that you're just not sure what to do about, and you have the opportunity to ask. So we hope that you will, that this time of working as a poll worker, which I think for most of you is your first time doing it, that it's really your entry into other work that you can do to help protect democracy, because the election is not going to protect itself. It really needs all of us on board. So that is our presentation for today. We have only a few minutes left before the time we said we would end, but I'm happy to stay longer if there are more questions. And I want to introduce to you one more person, Dan DeVries, who is a longtime poll worker in San Francisco, which happens to be where I live as well, though that's not why we know each other. We know each other because he's a member of Scrutineers. And Dan has been a poll worker and is available to answer questions that you have for poll workers. So if you have a question you'd like to ask, if you would type it into the Q&A box, that would be the most useful. And I see that there's one question here now, and here comes another one. Great. So Cheryl asks, are printouts of poll tapes posted in every state? No, they're not. So in order for them to be posted where you are, two things have to be true. One is generally it has to be required, though it's possible, and I think would be a really good idea this year for them to be posted even if it's not required. But not all states require the posting. And then the second thing is that not all voting systems create poll tapes. So if you follow some of the information that we've given you and made available, or about poll tapes, there are some resources about how you can figure out whether they will be posted where you are. For most people, honestly, since polling place, there's probably a polling place near where you live. It may be easier to just go there and look rather than to try to figure out in advance whether they'll be there or not, because there's not a clear answer that we can give you, like go here and get the answer. It's actually takes some research to find that out. Okay, and Patty says, just join Scrutineers online. How do I get the app for my phone? If you go into the profile section, which is the top right-hand corner on desktop, I'm not sure where it is on your phone, on the phone app. I haven't looked for that profile section there recently. You should get prompted to, inside that profile section, there's something that says, send me the app. And that's how. Or you can go into the App Store. The app is called Mighty Networks, which is the platform our site is built on. So you can go into the Google Play Store or the Apple App Store and look that up and put it on your phone, and then log in one time and you'll be there. So welcome. I look forward to seeing you in the site. Marlene says, not to sound rude, but do the 17-year-olds get paid while being a poll worker? So most states pay poll workers. I believe there may be a few states that don't. And yes, if you are old enough to be hired and your state pays, then you're old enough to get paid. Marlene asks, where I live, the poll will be open from 6:30 a.m. to PM throughout the day will we be able to take breaks and take a small snack. They absolutely should give you breaks. My experience when I've worked as a poll worker is it was pretty hard to take them because it was so busy, but you absolutely should get breaks. And Dan, would you like to say about what your experience with that has been? You're we both tried to unmute you at the same time. Try again. I'll keep my hands off the controls. You're still muted.
All right, yes. The polls that I worked at, it was pretty well organized. San Francisco, one of the things about it is, as Emily knows, is in 49 square miles, there's 588 polling places. So the action is really nicely spread out. But we were able to make sure the one adult and the one adult beside me and the 3 high school students all got their hour-long breaks in the course of the day. High school students you send home, you know, once it's closed, and they've done a couple of things that they help with at the end.
Great, thank you so much. Other questions?
Oh, and they do get paid in San Francisco as well. I asked one of them about that.
Good. I know in some places the pay has really been increased this year because they were so desperate for poll workers.
Yeah.
Do we have any other questions? So Patty's saying if you are thinking of sharing snacks with other poll workers, please make sure they're individually wrapped.
Yeah.
Very good point. And yeah, I would recommend taking gloves and hand sanitizer and a few extra masks with you as well this year. Wear comfortable shoes. You may be sitting down, you may be standing for a really long time. Drink water. Really take care of yourself. It's going to be, you know, often at an election, especially if it's not a presidential election, there will be long periods of time where there aren't any voters, or there's just a trickle of voters coming through. In this election, I think it's very possible you're going to be full on all day long. So that's tiring, and do what you can to take care of yourselves. Let's see, we've got another question here. Do we have to be in any formal wear? So no, you don't. There's no uniform for poll workers, and you don't have to wear a tuxedo or ball gown, anything like that. You just have to, so you should dress presentably, and the most important thing is, and dress comfortably, and the most important thing is that you not be wearing anything that expresses support or opposition to a candidate. Angel says, I'm a student poll worker and I've been reached out to fill out the form, but I've not been contacted any further. Should I take that as a sign that I was not hired? So we talked about this earlier, maybe you joined partway through. My suggestion was, if you haven't heard by tomorrow morning, assume that you haven't been hired, but at the very beginning, in the first, or maybe it was about 15 minutes or so into this call, I made 5 suggestions of ways that you could check on it. So let's see, I can put those 5 suggestions into the follow-up email as well, so that you can do those. Melissa, if you would remind me to do that, that would be really helpful. Patty is saying, bring a battery charger for your phones. That's a really good idea too. Make sure your phone is all the way charged. I thought that that Brittany's comment about if there is trouble that you need to video, that you should make sure to put your phone on do not disturb first. And when she said that, I thought, I don't actually know how to do that. So if you don't know how to do that, figure it out in advance so that you can do it quickly. And then finally, I want to remind you that I mentioned earlier that we're going to be sending you a wallpaper that you can put on your phone so that you don't have to unlock your phone to see it. And it will have on it the hotline numbers and a couple of little tips to remind you. You don't have to put that on your phone. It's just something we're offering to you so that you can have some of the information that you may need easily at your fingertips. And we will have that to you tomorrow. So let's see, 2 more questions have come in. Sterling says, we can wear a colorful hoodie. As far as I know, you can. I mean, I suppose it's possible. There are counties that have some kind of dress code. I've never heard of that being an issue. So if you're in a place where there's issues with gang colors, it would probably be better not to wear those colors. But other than that, go for it. Marlene asks, how do we know that we were hired? For example, I have my location does that mean that I have the job? If you received something from your county saying, here is your location, that was about you being a poll worker, not that's here's the location where you go vote, then that sure sounds like it means you were hired. But just if you got something from the county saying this is your polling place, they're probably telling you where to go vote. Which reminds me, if you're working at a polling place other than the one that you were assigned to, or other than a place where you are entitled to vote, it's really, really important that you, if you haven't voted yet, vote tomorrow, because you're going to be busy all day on election day. So if you possibly can, if you haven't voted yet, vote tomorrow. Okay, I think we have reached the end of the questions unless there are any in the chat. Sharon says she was told don't wear anything you wouldn't wear when you visit your grandmother, which as a grandmother who I would say that means don't wear your Spider-Man, my grandkids wore Spider-Man and SWAT team costumes yesterday, which I had a little bit of judgment about. I don't know why I'm sharing that with you, but that would be like something I would not want them to show up as poll workers wearing, is a Spider-Man outfit or a SWAT team outfit. But if they had been dressed as pumpkins, costumes would have been fine. So we have reached the end of our training. I want to thank you again so much for volunteering to be poll workers, for taking the time to come to this training. And I want to really encourage you, if you didn't see last week's training, it's an hour, about an hour and a half long. It is posted on YouTube. We will send out the link to you, but we may not send it out until tomorrow morning. So you can go to the Scrutineers YouTube channel. I'm going to talk for a minute and let Sean grab that link for you to the video of last week's training, which has a picture of Sean on the thumbnail. I really want to encourage you to watch it. There's a ton of information there, and to do your best. It's not going to go perfectly, even with the training that you may have gotten from your county, the additional training we've given to you, there will be errors. And what I can say is be as diligent as you can about getting everything right, and be kind to yourself, because you're being called to do something really hard. And the whole country, you deserve appreciation and thanks for the entire country, from the entire country, for what you're doing. So on behalf of the United States of America, I want to thank you for volunteering for this work. Thank you again for being here. I hope to see you in Scrutineers, and best wishes on Election Day. Thanks everyone, and bye for now.